Today's topic is burnout. So let's talk about how I personally experienced burnout in my corporate job. It happened about half a year ago, so I'm well on the other side of that now. But also the very uncomfortable realizations that I've had about what caused burnout, because I think naturally we all think about the environment we're in, the job we're in, but I have realized some things about my role in it, and I want to share it with you, especially if you're going through something similar, or you know that you're the type of person who is like me, so very ambitious, high achiever, wants good results, really productive, or wants to be productive all the time, struggles with rest, even though needs rest. If you're any of those things, I think you might resonate with this conversation. To begin with, I think I need to paint you the picture a bit more. First of all, about the job that I was in when I hit burnout, but also about me and what I'm like as a person. Let's start in school. And in school, I was a straight A student. I always was the nerdy one who would do the homework exactly right, and I never really broke rules, and if I did, it was out of trying to conform with a peer group and not wanting to be left out. So very much people-pleasing vibes and wanting to be included but never being cool. So the very standard nerdy kid that was liked by teachers because I never caused any problems, kind of on good terms with people, but never the one to be with the cool kids. That is me. And this is something that developed into being the type of person that gets accepted for a consulting job. And I think there are a lot of us there that are high achievers and also kind of a little bit insecure. The insecure overachiever is a term that I don't know who coined it, but it's something that people use to describe people who often go into consulting or into the industries where I guess you have to be always going above and beyond, and even then you might not be the best in that company, in that environment. I've been in consulting for about 3.5 years before I took this career break that I'm currently on to go to dance university. But at the point where I was hitting my burnout story, I was there for almost, more than 3 years. The thing about consulting, if you're not in the industry, if you don't know it that well, the way it works is consulting is just a format, and consulting can be in anything. I specifically work in human capital consulting, and I specialize in things like change management and organizational culture and leadership, things to do with people. And consulting means that you work in a consulting company. That company gets clients, other companies, and then those clients often need extra people, extra knowledge from somewhere to finish a project, to carry out a project of some sort that's time bound, usually. There are cases where you just get seconded as if you were an employee for something that's continuous, a continuous role, but that's rare. Usually it's for a project that lasts anything from several weeks to months, years. You, as a consultant, the amount of choice that you have in what you do exactly, what kind of projects that you go on to, depends very heavily on how the economy is doing and frankly how your industry is doing. And there were some golden years of consulting that I did not see because I joined after that. But in those golden years, there was so much demand for consulting and so much work in the pipeline. That pipeline, again, one of the jargon things in consulting, it's just the funnel, I guess, of work coming into your firm. So the clients that want to work with you. And in that time, from what I've heard from people who have been at the firm for that long, the way that you would approach choosing projects is you often get a choice of at least 2 or 3 because there's so much work going, and you can kind of, steer your work in the direction that you're interested in. And what you're usually expected to do in consulting is you join as an analyst and then you kind of try different things, you acquire a lot of general knowledge about consulting and how it works, and then a few years into that, maybe 3-4 years into that, you're expected to start specializing a little bit and having your own selling point. Like, what's the thing that distinguishes you from another consultant? And usually that's either a particular industry that you want to specialize in, a particular skill set, like, for example, organization and culture is the route I've been going down, culture and leadership. The expectation is that the further you go in the a consulting journey, the more kind of true to your interests the projects that you do are. I think that was the way it tended to work back then. And that meant that, you don't have full agency over your career trajectory in a consulting firm, because still, if you have proposed in a project that you don't want to go on to, but you don't have any other option, you can't just say no because you're being paid and it's your job. But you had a bit more steering power back then, where there were enough projects for you to choose. And that meant that people kind of felt like they're semi in control of their careers. And fast forward a few years and we hit recession, at least in the UK. And also we hit kind of a decline of consulting as an industry, not just the firm that I'm at, but generally across the board. There's just less demand. There is obviously AI happening as well. And there's redundancies across a lot of different sectors, consulting included, but also among clients, right? And if clients are cutting budgets, they have way less to spend on consulting. So we've kind of been in a little slump, in a big little slump of how consulting is doing for the past few years. That meant that almost throughout my entire career, I've not really seen good times of consulting, and it's changed in several ways. One is, of course, redundancies internally. I had to go through a round of that, not being made redundant, thankfully, but going through the consultation process and everything that's involved in being what they call at risk. And this is not anything secret. This is all out there in news and media. So the decline of consulting is not a surprise. It's like something that's been talked about for a while now. But also that meant that getting chargeable work is prioritized over anything and everything. Where you want to take your career, kind of in what niche you want to develop, is kind of secondary to just being able to get on a project. Because if you don't, then you get low utilization. Utilization is the time that you've been on a chargeable project. And then if your utilization is quite low, you have a very high chance of being made redundant, because that's one of the key metrics that you're assessed against when it comes to performance reviews and just generally. So that has meant that, of course, you apply to a particular team within a consulting firm, so you have that specialism at least. But if you've been in the industry yourself, you know just how broad it is. And even in the same team, you could be doing a merger and acquisition project, or you could be, like helping a company restructure, introducing new technology, working on a culture assessment, and all of that. All of those examples sit within my one small team, and there are so many of those teams and different kind of the different ways you cut the firm into specialisms. So you do have your team's kind of broad specialism, but other than that, if a project comes along, if it's chargeable and you can get on it, you have to say yes. Unless you have another much better option, which these days doesn't really happen often, because rarely do timings coincide and rarely do you get two equally good chargeable options. And then if you do, then you just go for the longer one, because that gives you utilization for longer. And that has meant that you can't really be as much in control of your work, and you kind of just have to go onto anything that comes along. So the sense of control, I think, has reduced a lot. And that's kind of where I have been for the majority of my consulting journey. I joined after the COVID boom has started to come down, and then well into all of this stuff happening and changing. This is important context for burnout story, because I think a big part of burnout is when you feel that you don't have control over what you do in your work. So this is where we're at. I was just doing the stuff that I did not actively choose. I was feeling really overwhelmed with the amount of stuff that was happening. There was no clear scope of what I was supposed to do, and it was kind of just merging into different roles that don't even fit with what my team is supposed to be doing. All of that eventually, and I think the accumulation of many years of a very, very stressful job that always pushes you to do more than a 9-to-5, always wants you to be responsive. You wake up checking your phone, your work phone, and you go to bed kind of checking your work phone. And it's not as bad as in the US, but it can be bad enough. It just so happened that everything accumulated, and being in a context where I felt like what I was doing was out of my hands in terms of the choice of what I go on to and what I actually specialize in, that led me to hit burnout. At the time, I think I was really frustrated with the system. And if you've been in a very intense job like this, I'm sure that you will share the feeling of just being frustrated at how sometimes money gets prioritized over people. And it's in a very broad sense. I'm not saying this about anyone in particular, and I've been working with some really great people, but just the system is structured in a way where you have to sell work. To sell work well, you have to make good margins on it. To make good margins on it, you sometimes push just how much few people can do and their capacity. Because then you can save and you can push more junior people to do more senior work. And all of that leads to how the industry works. So I crumbled and my mental health just gave in and I couldn't handle it at one point. And I think initially I was just very angry at the environment that has led to that, because I'm a person who really, really cares about the way people feel in an environment. This is why I specialize in organizational culture and leadership development. And I think those things, psychology-related things, like emotional safety-related things, they are deal breakers in a workplace. And I think if you don't have that element right, everything is going to feel very bad to the people who work for you. And the reality is that there'll be people who'll push through. And lots of people do, because lots of people work in very intense industries. Some just have high tolerance for that, for being in very pressured environments, for working long hours. Some people are just more okay with it because they're into work and they're into, I guess, kind of workaholic lifestyle or work hard, play hard lifestyle. But the people who are not, I think, might start feeling not cared for. Maybe that's just capitalism, but more broadly, I think it's a sum of many, many, many small decisions that people make about how they're going to lead a company, how they're going to assess people on their performance, what's involved in that, what are the key performance indicators, the KPIs for that, who gets promoted, what gets rewarded, how flexible can you be in your job. Like, for example, a big benefit of consulting, I feel, is the flexibility that you get and the amount of trust that you get with your time. All of that in the context of there's so much work to do that you will have to be working more than a 9 to 5. But that aside, if you have some sort of appointment, if you have a doctor visit, if you have a flat viewing, then more often than not, it will be fine with your team if you just give them a heads up and you say that I need to pop out for 2 hours, but I'll make up for that time. And no one even questions whether you will make up for that time, because you will. Otherwise, you're not going to stay in the job, kind of. I'm sure that maybe there are people who manage to make it work with, coasting through, but I think you can't do that for long enough. So flexibility is a big benefit, but with that flexibility comes the other side of flexibility, which is people work all sorts of hours. You might be getting emails late at night, and there are I think most people, at least that are on my side of the firm, like in more people related specialisms, they would say that I don't expect you to reply at that hour. However, there have been times where people did expect me to reply at that hour, and during personal commitments, during, like all sorts of stuff. And that's the other side of flexibility, where you don't have clear boundaries because, but you could go to that appointment during the day, right? So you can work during the evening, and it gets very blurry. I guess it just shows to say that there are some very positive elements like that flexibility I've not seen in other jobs, and just the way that you can, I'm just gonna go and do a gym session during lunch, and you can, and no one will chase you, except for you probably have so many calls that you physically can't because your schedule is crazy and you're hopping from call to call. So, if you had the time you could, but it's very pressured, so you're going to be working. I was going to say that there is an impulse and that I had when I hit that burnout period, where I was just incredibly resentful towards the job because it made me burn out, right? And I think that there are so many structural elements that do genuinely lead to burnout like this. If you have the culture of working all and any hours, if you have the culture of always wanting to perform at the next grade up versus what yours actually is and what you're paid for, because that's the standard, and then if you want to be promoted, you almost have to perform at 2 grades up to get the grade upgrade. That leads to people who are always pushing so hard, and I think because of that insecure overachiever pattern where lots of us end up in the industry somehow, we're always wanting to be not left behind and to not be worse than others. And we're never sure that the work that we're doing is enough. And I think because we're never sure that our work is enough, that's what leads us to accept that, oh, damn, like I need to be performing at that level, not at my level. That leads to a pattern where there's almost like an inflation of expectation, because your grade level is no longer enough to be considered good at your grade level. And you can see how very gradually that can lead to people working at a pace that is not sustainable. I think you're always punching above your weight a little bit, and it's great for adapting. It's great. It's a great school for managing pressure. It's a great school for multitasking and context switching and honestly leading before you're ready, presenting at client calls, public speaking. I'm actually very grateful for this job for teaching me those things because they're really, really serving me well now. However, the amount of pressure that comes with it is like, I don't know, it kind of feels like when you throw the baby into the water and to survive they're just supposed to learn to swim. That's kind of how it feels. Ideally you would, support the baby a little bit or like be there as a safety net, but it's just that's how it felt. It took me a long time of going through that burnout period. Thankfully I could take mental health leave and I could actually recover for a bit before getting back to the job. I started to be thinking, what part did I play in this? And this was a very, very critical question because since then, as you know, I've taken a career break and I'm now in a completely different environment. I'm out of the job and I am in a university again. I am studying something that I absolutely love. And yes, it is very tough, but it's something that I so actively chose because I really, really wanted to do it and dreamt of doing something that would help me level up as a dancer. And yet, somehow, I managed to be stressed. And I started thinking, when I got into this year and I had so many expectations of myself of, okay, I'm stepping back from the job. That means I'm going to have more mental energy. That means I'm going to have more time, I thought, before I realized what my schedule would be and how physically intense it is. I knew it would be physically intense, but I didn't realize that the hours would be literally from 9 to 5 or 6. I thought naively from my first university degree, which was in social sciences, it was in economics and politics. And you will know if you've been to a social sciences degree that the contact hours are very, very low. And I remembered how I had so much time for anything and everything back then. I was like, this is the time to do side hustles, to do YouTube, to do freelancing, to do all the stuff, to like start earning on the side, start, really committing to the social media journey, all alongside a degree that I'm going to really love. And then I started the degree and I was so incredibly tired because it's very, very, very demanding for your body to be doing a 9 to 5 in dance when you've not done full-time training before. It's a very big adjustment. And then I started getting so incredibly stressed because I was feeling like I had all these plans. I'm now not sure if I can fulfill all those plans. I was starting to feel, very overwhelmed with the pressure of like wanting to perform at the next grade level, do this and do that, do this and also social media, do this and have more time for other things. And then I didn't. And I think that made me so incredibly anxious about what I'm going to achieve by the end of the year compared to what I want to achieve. And I think that is literally the insecure overachiever in a nutshell. And then I was like, I'm kind of getting myself to a point of not burnout. I don't think I've even like gotten close to that this year. And I mean academic year since I started the course, not at all, but I got to some stressful moments where I was feeling overwhelmed with the to-do list that I had for myself because I've decided that I want to do all of these other things. And that made me realize that I think that I brought some elements of burnout with me. And I think it's just my personality. as well as the context that I'm in, as well as the environment, the culture of the company, and all of that stuff. As much as I can blame consulting, as much as I can blame the culture of a company that pushes you to perform at that level, it is also me who is expecting myself to conform to that and perform at that level, and also never feels good enough. Because, and I'll give you an example, there were people in consulting, and there were very few, but there were some who just had the stoicism about them, like the calmness and the ability to still talk very well, very confidently, but at the same time to not over prepare, to not feel anxious about the amount of the to-do list, but just methodically work through the to-do list. And then if they hit the end of the day and they've not done everything, they just say, I'll move it to the next day. And then if it ends up being that they're behind on the timelines, they go to the manager or the leadership and they say that, hey, I think the scope that we planned is looking like it's out of my capacity. What can I deprioritize? And, like being a bit more like grounded, calm about it, and not giving a I don't know if can I swear on YouTube? And just not giving a fuck about how am I going to be, like, am I going to be perceived like I've not done enough? Am I going to be perceived like I didn't manage to fulfill all these things? They just say, you know what? I didn't manage to do that today. I'm going to log off now because it's 5. And then I'm going to work hard the next day. But if I have a personal commitment, I'm just going to say I'm off. I have a personal commitment. That takes such a level of not giving a fuck about all of that, stressy expectation to do more and more and more all the time. There are maybe like 2 people I've met who said that, you know what, I log off at 5. I've accepted that means that I'm probably not going to be promoted. And they've said it outright. They said, I am content where I'm at. The salary works well for me. This grade works well for me. I don't need to push anymore. I'm just going to sit here, do my work very well, but in my allocated hours, and I'm not going to succumb to that always being online thing, always being responsive thing, always going above and beyond thing. I have huge admiration for that because it takes so much to go against the grid, against the culture, and most people don't. So I've realized that I am not one of those 2 people. I'm very much with the majority that gets into the flow of that stressiness. And it's so hard to actually understand how stressed you were during it, unless you're out of it, like I am now, and I look back retrospectively and I just think, oh my God, I was not okay. Like I was not thriving. I was constantly stressed all the time. If I'm on a project, I'm stressed from the amount of work that is expected of me on that project. If I'm switching projects, I'm stressed because I don't know how my experience will be with a new team, whether they'll be into work-life balance or not into work-life balance, whether they'll be caring about people in their team or not at all, and they'll just want to make really lots of profit by selling more work. That uncertainty was really stressful. And then if you're off a project, you would think, right, the bench is what they call it, as being off the project. You would think that it's a lovely and relaxing time. And it was at some point. I think it was in the good times of consulting, because it was so rare, and you would maybe get a week off a project and then you would get the next one. These days, it's stressful because you're thinking, I'm going to be made redundant if I don't find a project soon enough. And you need to be seen to be doing a lot of work. So you go on bids, you try and sell work with people in your team. And that is also a grind. And usually you have to juggle several things at once. Now that I'm out of that, I do think, the culture had a big role to play in my burnout, for sure. But also so did I. And now that I've experienced being very stressed and very overwhelmed with the amount of stuff that I need to do in a completely different context, which objectively is just so much easier in terms of the expectations, the support that I get, the way that I do what I love, it's making me face the fact that, girl, you have partially also led yourself to burnout because you didn't have strong enough boundaries, because you have such high expectations of yourself all the time, and you struggle to stop. You struggle to say, this is enough for today, enough for the week, enough for this upcoming year. I don't need to do more. I can just do this and it's enough. I am not the type of person who feels like it's easy to just say enough. It's always more. And then on top of that, you never feel like you're doing a good enough job. And I think this is related to confidence and imposter syndrome and all of that stuff. But I really have noticed how one of my biggest challenges, I think, in my late 20s, but also into the 30s for sure, is to really back myself and really realize how much I can do and my skill level and the different strengths that I have, because I'm very good at spotting my weaknesses or being very nervous, very anxious about not being able to do a good job. But what I need to get better at is backing myself and saying that, no, I absolutely can do a good job. Look at all this evidence that shows me that I can. And all the strengths that I have in this degree, in the course and during this time. What I'm learning to balance is two very contradictory things. One is ambition, because as much as I say that high expectations can get, to a toxic level, and they definitely did for me, I also think that ambition is great. And I want to achieve a lot. And I think there's a very positive side of that, which I want to lean into. It's the side that pushes me to do better, to do more, but, to work smart and hard as well, to have the work ethic, to have the commitment to really keep pursuing things that make me excited, make me use my brain, make me practice my social skills. That ambition I'm really happy to have. At the same time, I also want to somehow manage to be less stressed and to be more confident. It's basically untangling that insecure overachiever thing into a confident achiever, right? So not overachieving, achieving, and being ambitious, yes, but in a healthy way, but also being confident and feeling like, what, today was a rest day. It's okay. I can take a pause. I can recharge. Maybe there's a day where I've done one key thing and then I start feeling like I need to do more. I need to keep going through my to-do list, but I can just stop at that one thing and say that this was enough. This is fine. I've done a thing that's gonna move the needle for me. It was an important task. I can now be content and relax. Even saying that out loud, I'm like, oh my God. I would just love to get to a point where I can do that to myself, where I just can breathe out a little bit and not be constantly stressy. Moral of the story is that if you're hitting burnout, I think, like in a toxic relationship, maybe I don't know if it's a good parallel to make, but it's usually not one person's fault. It's usually the dynamic that you've created, and the dynamic is created by both sides overlapping and like being in the same space together. Like me being in a consulting job creates that dynamic, or when I was a very insecure and anxious person in a relationship with someone who was very avoidant, that created that dynamic. It's never just one side, right? And that's making me take more responsibility for the way that I show up and for that burnout than I initially thought. It's a thin line to walk between that and victim blaming because, objectively, some companies just have incredibly inhumane conditions. This is not one of them. I think this is more a cultural thing, but there are some that have illegal working conditions that just have expectations that are not compatible with being safe, and I'm not talking about those situations. I think in that case, absolutely the firm or the leadership or the person who's responsible for that is responsible for that. But in more gray area things very intense jobs like this, but in the UK where we have still legislation that protects the rights of workers really well compared to a lot of the global average, probably. I don't know the stats, but I think we're very lucky here that this is what we struggle with. This is what we struggle with. It's just longer working hours and the pressure and whatever, but we're safe at work, and all of that stuff is a big privilege to have. And I think if you're in a situation like that where you're grappling with the cultural aspect, you're maybe in an environment that is pushy and pressuring, But what are you doing as well to contribute to that dynamic? And could you change anything to, first of all, help yourself be better in the situation that you're in right now, but also think whether that situation is right for you or not? And I say that because, ironically, from my organizational culture knowledge, I know that values alignment is a very important thing. And the reason I say that is because there will be people who will really value working hard like that, working longer hours, and always striving to go a level above where you're at. Those people exist, and there are people who genuinely thrive in consulting. It's just, probably not me. It's a different type of person who likes the uncertainty of the next project. It excites them to do a new thing where they don't know what the team is going to be like. It excites them to context switch. It excites them to have so much variety in the type of projects that you do. And as much as I personally think that work-life balance can do a lot of good for everyone, it's my value, and not everyone has that value. And I think there are companies that hold it, and there are companies that don't. So if I'm in an environment that doesn't have the same values as me, a question to me is, what would be a better environment, right? Or how can I create that better environment within the place that I'm at? Is it a particular team? Is it a particular specialism? Can I create something that is a bit more aligned with me? And most of the time you kind of can. It's just, it takes a lot of effort and a lot of work to actually get there, but it's possible. And, you might be switching teams internally. You might be a bit more proactive about your boundaries and about communicating the specialism you want to go down, and say that I really, really want to pursue this niche within my job. Talk to people, make them help you, make them want to help you go down that specialism. Or, at the very extreme, switching jobs eventually to something that will feel more you. That dynamic, like we were saying, it's a two-way street, and you need to not only question the environment that you're in, but also yourself, and think, how can I work on my internal thought patterns, my tendencies to not be as freaking intense, is what I say to me. Like, please just relax, girl. You're fine. Like, you know that you want to achieve a lot. You will be okay, and you know that you'll achieve a lot. Just trust the process and don't feel the urgency all the time, because the urgency is so draining. Take your time, trust that things will unfold, and trust yourself to do things well and eventually get to a result that you want, or better. It might be something different. That's where I'm at the moment, and that's the very tough realization I had about my burnout that I had. It's that it wasn't just the job, it was also me, and I bring it with me wherever I go. And if I want to avoid it in the future, then I don't just need to think about what I'm doing and the job that I'm in, but I also need to think about me and what I do internally in my brain, in my mind, the things that I'm thinking, the patterns that I have, the pressure that I put on myself, the to-do list that I make for myself, and how can I make myself internally less prone to burning out. So after this huge ramble, I want to know, have you ever been burnt out? And if so, what have you learned from it? And what do you think caused it? I would be curious to know. Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.